The girl felt amazing that warm, sunny morning, with birds chirping in the leaves, sparkling in the sunlight. The other maids were celebrating finishing the laundry at last, and complaining about their stiff backs. Another one bragged that she'd bulked up a little these past few days, adding that their job was harder than blacksmithing. Then, feeling totally drained, they decided to take a short break, 'cause if they went right back, they'd just get swamped again. That's when they noticed Princess Grace walking by, the one everyone in the empire thought was so beautiful. The girls wondered how happy the king must be to have a daughter, since she could wear whatever clothes she wanted. But Siana didn't think Grace was pretty, noting that her dresses were clearly the wrong size, like 40 pounds too big. The girl explained it was like dressing a baby piglet, and suspected she was in serious pain wearing that corset. It looked like someone had wrapped the princess in a steel cable by force, and she still had to walk around and smile. The maids were amazed she could tell all that, but she didn't admit that just a few months ago, she was a princess herself. When she was born, her mom was the queen, her dad was the king, and she was little Princess Siana Asaland von Salite. Like any other princess, she thought she'd lucked out in life. But her mom died when she was only 10. Her dad decided to remarry to strengthen the kingdom, and Siana really missed her mom and felt super lonely. Her stepmom announced that, in the late queen's name, she'd do everything she could to make the girl a proper princess. And as Siana got her education, she was bullied a lot. Her stepmom thought she was way too dumb for her age. Then the queen declared that from now on, for every mistake the princess made, she'd be punished with the whip. Siana tried her best, but because of the corset and the super heavy dress, she couldn't bow properly to greet her stepmom. She felt like she was about to die, but she didn't give up. But once again, she messed up the bow, and the queen saw it as disobedience. The queen said the princess was a pain in the butt, and declared she had no right to call herself a princess, and that the king couldn't take her to banquets. She also explained that it was all for the good of their kingdom, so the little girl shouldn't be mad or angry at her. She raised the whip to strike the girl, but stopped cold when the king walked in. The princess silently begged him for help, but he just said the queen wasn't wrong to discipline a kid who's slacking off. Siana felt lost and betrayed in that moment. She couldn't believe she was to blame for all this. All she wanted was to be happy, but she was done being a princess and just wanted out. She dreamed of escaping, remembering her mom, but knew she had to endure it all until she turned 18. By then, their castle had fallen to another kingdom, the conqueror of the entire continent. Soon, the infamous blood prince, Rashid Labizuan, showed up, the first prince of the Labizuan Empire. He announced that they hadn't answered his letter demanding surrender, so he came in person. Then he asked if they'd surrender to him. Siana figured this was her shot. If they gave up, they wouldn't die. But the king declared he wasn't about to serve some low-life invader, demanding they just kill him now. In that instant, Prince Rashid lopped his head clean off, declaring they were the first who refused to bow. And get this, he'd planned to spare them, kill no one. But the whole thing was so boring, it didn't even faze him. Then the princess saw him heading her way. But she didn't want to die, she was still just a kid. She couldn't believe it was ending like this, and she fell to his feet, begging for help, saying she'd do anything. Rashid figured she was offering herself as a wife, but Siana insisted she was nowhere near ready for that, and had nothing feminine about her. She even said she couldn't compare to the kingdom's top beauties, and although she looked fearless, she really just wanted to survive. Next, the girl explained that she was super healthy, could embroider, and brew a delicious, fragrant tea. After saying all that, the princess declared she could be the perfect maid for the prince. Afterwards, even she couldn't believe she'd spouted such ridiculous nonsense, and then she looked at the prince and noticed how handsome he was. Everyone said he was the greatest warrior on the continent, but Siana decided he was just using his charm. Rashid noticed then that her face was round and soft, like a bun made from the purest wheat flour. Then he finally agreed to let the princess work as a servant in the imperial palace, and ordered her to be untied. The girl was overjoyed to have survived this hellhole. Then she thanked the prince and introduced herself by name. She also assured him that she would never forget his kindness, while he was thinking about how he'd picked a cutie. So Siana became a servant in the imperial palace, though she could get bummed out, wondering how she'd gotten so unlucky. But now, thanks to her, fresh bread was baked, clothes were getting clean, and the garden was becoming even more beautiful. Before, she had to wear a corset that squeezed her body all day and smile like a doll. Now her life was completely different, and Siana even found it more fun and much more comfortable being a servant, which she thought was great. Now the girl wanted to be a maid for the rest of her life, and for the sake of cleanliness, she often did things even when she wasn't asked. The other maids figured she was trying to suck up to the senior maids and explained that she had to ask what to do first. Mostly, it was this servant girl named Jean who was pissed, telling Siana she was just a slave from a conquered country anyway. She also made it clear this girl would never make the main maid squad and always treated her like dirt. That's when another one, Choo Choo, walked in and yelled at Jean for picking on the slow workers instead of helping out. She also threatened the screamer, saying if she kept it up, she'd report her to the head maids. Jean backed down then, but told Choo Choo she could keep playing around with these know-nothing kids. Then she dumped a bucket of water and told Siana she could keep doing what she loved best: cleaning. After that, everyone scattered, and Jean, who was left, advised the newbie to fight back. She explained they only messed with her because she took it silently, but Siana had no clue others were even bothering her. See, for the former princess who'd been bullied her whole life by the new queen, this kind of grumbling seemed kinda sweet. Now, the girl understood they were showing her disrespect, and Choo Choo shared that, considering her family, fighting back wouldn't be easy. She knew that girl was from a respected family in the kingdom, so whatever she did, she was basically guaranteed to become a maid. The other two trainees are also trying to get something out of Jean, which is why they're always following her around. So she just chills, hoping they'll pick her based on her family. But Choo Choo was just as much a trainee as Siana. She's got a strong, solid build, which makes her one of the more promising trainees. Plus, she doesn't have family connections to fall back on, so there's no guarantee she'll officially become a maid. Jean understood that Siana had nowhere else to go either, and yet somehow she'd become a maid trainee. That meant someone helped her, and the princess figured it was the emperor of this country. Or maybe it was because, forgetting her princess's honor, the girl had bowed to the floor and begged for mercy. Siana thought that in that moment she'd seemed pathetic or ridiculous to Rashid, that he didn't sympathize with her at all, and it was just a whim. But she couldn't admit all that to Jean, so she just claimed that no one had helped her. Just then, Sul, the emperor's personal guard, walked in and saw him playing with his little critters. The emperor himself was stunning, with an angelic face that captivated everyone who laid eyes on him. He even mesmerized enemies on the battlefield. Sul, having grown up with him, knew this all too well. He asked the guard how that girl was doing, and Sul reported that she was doing fine. He added that Siana wasn't used to physical labor, so she's a bit lost, but she's smart and learns fast. Still, it'll take time for her to become an official maid. Sul wondered why Rashid was so worried about her. He didn't even know himself. He figured he just felt sorry for her, since he destroyed her country and killed her family. The guard was surprised. He'd destroyed so many lives, so why was he even thinking about it now? Then Sul asked the emperor to be honest and admit that he's always been into girls like that, small, with big eyes, and seemingly harmless. And it was true. Rashid, the so-called bloody emperor, this cruel and handsome man, just adored animals. Sul was still blown away every time he saw it, and the emperor admitted Siana did have something similar to them. He even said he hoped she'd become an official maid, and they'd find her a good position. But Sul argued, you can't just promote a maid trainee whose skills haven't been proven to full-fledged maid status. Rashid agreed, and decided they should test her abilities themselves to see if she had any potential. The maids headed to lunch, which was meatless again, but Siana said they shouldn't be focused on proper eating etiquette. She claimed they could eat as much as they wanted now, but the others figured she thought that way, 'cause she was from another country. Siana also thought it wasn't necessary to keep up a conversation, so this place and position seemed like paradise to her. Jean even joked, asking how she could eat such garbage, and the girl realized she was being made fun of again. Siana figured she should cry after words like that, but she just kept a straight face. Jean didn't get what was up with this girl, and why she thought everything was normal, saying it wouldn't make her cool. Choo Choo thought that girl, being from another country, should worry more, and then yelled at the grump for always picking on the quiet one. But Jean pointed out that she'd defended her before, then reminded her that she was in charge and to pay attention to the vibe. Then they got into this back and forth that reminded Xian of a grizzly bear wrestling a hyena. Just then, Miss Lip, the etiquette instructor, walked in and immediately asked what was going on. Seeing two students arguing, the two of them instantly clammed up, and Lip ordered them not to cause trouble in front of her, no matter how bad they wanted to fight. Then she announced that an official document had come from above, and that a tea ceremony would be held in a few days. All the students, along with Lip, would be serving the guests who came, and it was important to follow strict etiquette and not make mistakes. A maid from the main staff would also be working with them, but the girls started wondering who would be at the tea ceremony. They guessed it would be the wife of some big-shot aristocrat, or maybe a beautiful princess from a neighboring country. But Lip explained that it was women who grow fruit for delivery to the palace who were coming. The fruit they've been growing for the palace for years now is seriously incredible. And this tea ceremony is to show our gratitude. Plus, there's training in the morning before the tea party. So everyone needs to meet in the garden right after they wake up, and Sienna was stoked she got picked for this gig. Jean, though, was pissed she had to wait on some old biddies, and thought this job was perfect for the newbie. Then she snarked that Sienna wouldn't even be at the reception if it wasn't to service those ladies. The ex-princess understood that those ladies were just working class, which is why they trusted maids to serve them. It didn't require special care. Otherwise, they'd have sent the official maids to the reception. But it still seemed weird. The next morning, Lip started teaching the apprentices tea etiquette, and first of all, they can't forget they're in the imperial palace. The girls gotta learn this right, so they don't embarrass the imperial family. Choo-Choo was happy that even though the official work hasn't started yet, she was already allowed to try herself as a maid. She said she'd give it her all, but worried her drive and skill levels might not match up. Then she started pouring tea, and Lip corrected her, reminding her not to splash drops everywhere. The other trainees teased her, calling her a muscle-bound idiot, saying tea wasn't the beer her minor dad drinks. Choo-Choo got angry at the other trainees for saying that, and she was also bummed about getting scolded by the teacher. Next up was Jean's turn to pour tea, and she did everything perfectly and neatly, earning praise from the teacher. The girl was thrilled about it, since she'd been taught by a famous etiquette instructor from the capital. Lip thought Jean wasn't the kind of person who should even be a trainee maid. Plus, rumors were going around that she'd become the head maid and serve Her Majesty the Empress. Sienna herself saw that she did okay, but figured it was only for a first-timer and still just at a trainee maid level. Back when the carefully selected maids made even the smallest mistake, the queen would punish them immediately. These maids, trying to soothe the Empress's bad mood, poured and served tea with more finesse than any noble lady. Compared to what Sienna had seen before, everyone here seemed clumsy and awkward. Now it was her turn to practice pouring tea. And for now, that was enough. She wasn't a princess anymore. Not wanting to stand out because of her past, she poured tea slowly and deliberately, but with a hint of clumsiness. Sienna really wanted to stay in the palace, and she knew she had to be quiet to do it. After afternoon training, the trainees had to go to their assigned places and do the work they couldn't do in the morning. That meant cleaning the palace, stoking fires, and washing dishes. But everyone managed. Then they brought out a snack made from leftover bread, considered a treat for the starving trainee maids. Sienna was grateful, thinking it was worth working in the kitchen for this, and was glad they'd been assigned here. Suddenly, she noticed Choo-Choo acting strange today and barely talking, so she offered her some food. So, she asked the former princess if it was tough learning from the maids. Sienna said they weren't really harsh, and admitted she was even a little jealous. The princess remembered that Choo-Choo got the most flack during the tea lesson today, which is probably why she was so upset. Before, this student was always praised, but today was the first time this happened, and she took it way too hard. Turns out, this was also Choo-Choo's first real test, and she admitted Jean was right, and she'd never actually had tea. Plus, she has zero experience that could help her, and everyone noticed she was the worst at it. Now, Choo-Choo was scared the guests would be mad at her, and Sienna decided she had to help this girl out. So, she offered to practice together every day during their break. Just the two of them. Choo-Choo was thrilled, hoping she'd teach her everything, and thought she was incredibly kind. After that, they started practicing every night, and Sienna explained that first, you gotta boil the right amount of water. All right, next you gotta throw a spoonful of tea leaves into the warmed-up teapot and then immediately pour boiling water over 'em. After that, strain it through a tea strainer, And I should mention, to become a pro at this stuff, you need a ton of practice. Over time, Choo Choo was getting better. Not perfect yet, but she wasn't messing up the order or spilling tea anymore. Siana was now relieved that Choo Choo definitely wouldn't be accused of mistreating the guests, and not a drop would go to waste. Choo Choo thanked her friend for the lessons, thinking that Siana had taught her way better than the other maids ever could. But the former princess modestly explained that Choo Choo herself was trying hard. That's why she was improving, 'cause she's a diligent student. Also, during their training sessions, they became pretty close, and Choo Choo told her partner a lot about herself. She confessed that she's from a mining town in the east, and her dad's a miner who works every single day. He has to feed 13 kids, which surprised Siana, and Choo Choo added that they're a really close-knit family. But it's tough for them to make ends meet, which is why she applied for the maid job, to help her dad out. She admitted official maids got paid way better, and she wanted her little siblings to eat meat every day. Then Choo Choo started asking Siana how she ended up here, figuring her story was probably complicated since she came from overseas. That's when the girl confessed she used to be a princess of a tiny kingdom, and the crown prince assigned her here. He explained he felt bad for her, since she'd lost her country and her parents. Choo Choo couldn't believe Siana was talking about the Rashid, the bloodthirsty prince who never lost a fight. Even more unbelievable was that a former princess had actually met him. Siana suddenly remembered overhearing stories from the maids as she walked by, and realized he was a big deal. The girls whispered that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was even more stunning than a statue. They gushed about how his silver hair shimmered in the sunlight, and his violet eyes were as bright as the Milky Way. Then, Choo Choo confessed to the princess she just dreamed of seeing the prince, and Siana confirmed he really was gorgeous. Then she wanted to know if he really was a cold-hearted bastard, despite being so damn good-looking. Siana confirmed it too, saying he'd wiped out her entire family. And that's when Choo Choo apologized for blurting that out without thinking. The princess still couldn't bring herself to talk about her true feelings and insisted she was fine, since those people had made her life hell. But then Choo Choo was like, "No way, that's messed up." She couldn't believe she was okay with it, considering the prince murdered her whole family. But Siana just repeated herself, explaining that it had been a long time, so there was no reason to get so worked up about it. Choo Choo still knew she was only saying that to keep her from feeling guilty. She also pointed out that the former princess was super kind, then hugged her and repeated it a few more times. From that day on, Siana's attitude toward her friend totally changed, and Choo Choo started treating her differently too. One evening while cleaning up, Jean snuck up on the princess, trying to scare her. But Choo Choo stepped in front of her like a mama bear, warning her not to even think about saying anything out of line to Siana. If Jean disobeys, the protector threatened to stretch her face like cheese and wrap it around a pole. She got freaked out, but immediately started making excuses, saying she just wanted to know what time it was, and left. Besides, Choo Choo always brought Siana food for no reason and urged her to eat, saying she still needed to grow. She mostly got the princess sweets, explaining that they were way sweeter and tastier than crusty bread. At the same time, Choo Choo hated the prince for leaving the little girl without a family and thought he was a total scumbag. The maid wished all sorts of bad things on him. Mostly it sounded childish, but she said it with all her heart. Siana even felt a little sorry for the crown prince, who she hated. But it was also nice to have someone on her side. Anyway, since he's in such a high position, he probably hears people bad-mouthing him a bunch of times every day. At that moment, Rashid received a letter from Baroness Appleton, and Sol asked him what was wrong, noticing the prince scratching himself. But he just explained that his ear was itchy, and even remembered the superstition that someone was scolding him at that very moment. Sol shot that down, saying if that were true, the prince would have been rolling around on the floor for years, scratching his ears raw. Then he noticed a chipmunk munching on an apple and remarked that it must taste pretty good. Rashid agreed, saying the Appletons had the best apples, and the guard pointed out those farmers never got an invite to the palace to be thanked. Then he suggested the emperor throw a reception. Plus, he could use it as an excuse to check out Siana. The prince liked that idea and decided to reward the guard by letting him play with his adorable pets for half a day. Sol still refused, and Rashid declared he just didn't understand how cute his little darlings were. Then he read a letter and shared with the guard that the Baroness would also be happy to join the tea party. The maids went through all kinds of training because the imperial family's status couldn't be lowered by a servant's mistake. At the same time, they had to clean up the uneven lawn and arrange the tables based on the number of guests. On top of everything, Sienna added hydrangeas she'd cut that morning, so it wouldn't look too monotonous. After that, she decided to enjoy the view for a bit, and Choo Choo filled her in on the gossip. She confessed that it wasn't just farmers coming to the tea party, but also Baroness Appleton, the owner of the orchard. Now, Sienna understood why everyone was so hyped up. Besides the guests, they wanted to impress the Baroness. The girls also noticed Jean looked extra gorgeous today, even switched up her jewelry and makeup. Choo Choo thought it looked kinda trashy, and Sienna doubted that would impress the Baroness. Her friend guessed it was because this was Jean's first guest, then admitted she dolled herself up a little too. She was also worried about everything going smoothly, but Sienna told her not to sweat it, since she taught her to be a maid for a reason. There wasn't much time left before the doors opened and the guests arrived, and the maids braced themselves to greet them. The guests were surprised that this was the imperial palace. One of them even wore her best dress. After the greetings, the maid trainees led the guests to the table, but Jean remained standing still. The other girls couldn't figure out why she was being so extra, but they had a hunch she was trying to score points with the Baroness. Even while serving, the place reeked of high society, and the guests were already gossiping about the maids. Still, the banquet couldn't start until everyone arrived, and the Baroness herself showed up last. The trainees were stoked when they saw her, especially Jean, 'cause the Baroness was seriously gorgeous. A maid instantly rushed over, giving her the VIP treatment and thanking her for gracing them with her presence. Jean's face went totally psycho for a split second from the nerves, and she knew that anyone who saw it would bolt. She managed to keep it together, though, and asked the madame to follow her, then led her to her reserved spot. Xian caught a whiff of a sweet, expensive rose scent coming from Appleton, even though she thought they were just some backwater nobles. The ex-princess also noticed that this woman was seriously stunning. She'd always wondered what the Baroness looked like, and now she was even a little jealous of Jean. The other guests noticed another arrival, but Sienna couldn't quite make out who it was yet. But she soon saw a hunched-over old woman approaching, so hideous that nobody wanted to serve her. The banquet still hadn't started, waiting for the last guest, so Sienna went over and greeted the old woman. The girl understood that no guest could be ignored, and then offered to escort her to a table. Each table seated 3 or 4 guests, and they were served by a single maid. And after all the guests were seated, it was announced that the imperial banquet could now begin. The guests chatted about being in the imperial palace, even though it seemed like a normal tea party. They even admitted, thinking they'd spend their lives picking apples and never experience this kind of luxury. Sienna overheard their conversation and realized they were just talking about everyday stuff. There was no talk of state affairs, which made the atmosphere pretty chill. But the ex-princess was all about service and soon presented the guests with their dessert for the day. Popping the lid, she explained it was chocolate made from Kana cocoa and suggested they just eat it and savor the flavor. The ladies were surprised they were being served chocolate usually reserved for royalty. Apparently, it's so sweet. Even the prince himself would stop complaining once he tasted it. Then the women started chatting about the dessert, each popping a piece into their mouths. Immediately, a pleasant wave of sweetness washed over them, and they realized it was unbelievably delicious. The chocolate just melted in their mouths, and they started worrying that the sweetness was disappearing so fast. Sienna knew that for first-timers trying chocolate, that kind of reaction was totally normal. The ex-princess also noticed that the old woman had quickly finished her dessert and was now just wiping the remnants from around her mouth. Then, a maid approached her and offered a napkin, understanding she was uncomfortable because she'd also gotten it all over her hands. The girl offered to get her something else, but she just turned away, refusing. Then the other guests remembered they had handkerchiefs too and started offering them up. They also figured that the maids, used to serving noble ladies, must feel awkward waiting on the likes of them. But Sienna explained everything was fine, that they were all her honored guests, and then asked them to enjoy the tea party. After that, the girl offered to pour the ladies some Ingrid's Earl Grey, hoping they'd like it. But she also added that if they preferred something else, they should feel free to let her know. The guests agreed and were soon tasting the delicious tea, realizing it was the kind the royal family drank. Then, One of the ladies couldn't quite put her finger on what made this tea different from what she drank at home. And the old woman explained that to really understand the taste of food or drink, you had to take small bites or sips. The ladies also understood that the Baroness was the only one who knew that, but also knew that she was the guest of honor today. So, Siana figured not everyone knew the Baroness and decided to clarify. And they explained Appleton Namjik had recently gotten married. One lady added that she definitely hadn't been on the farm before because she'd never seen her, but she'd heard the Baron fell head over heels for her at first sight, since she really is gorgeous. Now, Siana understood Jean was going to have to listen closely to this guest and not screw things up. Because if she pisses her off, the whole party's going to be ruined. And that old grump was just stoked to finally have the most important guest in front of her. Jean was a merchant's daughter and believed it was her duty to serve someone like the Baroness. Then she offered Appleton chocolate from the Imperial Palace, explaining it was top-tier stuff and worth a try. But the Baroness just kept sitting there, eyeing the dessert, and then asked how long the maid was planning to ignore her. Appleton also added that Jean's snooty greeting and the look she was giving her felt like she was being covered in dirt. She was even putting up with the sight of the dessert, and then she declared the maid had poured her tea terribly. After that, the Baroness wanted to know how long she had to put up with such rudeness, and Jean just offered to pour her more tea. The maid was sure she hadn't messed anything up. She'd trained with a noble family, and the other maids always complimented her. The Baroness also pointed out that the maids at the Imperial Palace were usually top-notch, but something still felt off. Then she remembered that maids who screwed up got seriously punished. Appleton added that they'd get locked in cages or flogged, and if they messed up again, they'd lose a limb. Then she asked Jean what kind of punishment she thought she deserved, and the poor girl was just shaking with fear. Siana jumped in, explaining that their skills were still pretty basic, and Jean wasn't ready to be serving such high-ranking guests. Then the former princess started begging the Baroness to forgive the maid for her mistake. But the Baroness snapped back that if all it took was a bow and an apology, their world would be ridiculously simple. Appleton didn't see why she should give the maid a second chance, especially since the royal family was throwing this banquet. Siana explained that if this party got ruined because of one measly maid, the king would be seriously pissed. She was hoping the Baroness wouldn't want that. But for some reason, the Baroness took her words as a threat. The former princess swore she wouldn't act like that and explained they were just requests to make the guest comfortable. After thinking it over, the Baroness agreed to be served by Siana, but declared that if she wasn't satisfied, all her rage would be unleashed on her. The maid agreed, but then she saw her stepmother's face again, the one where she actually complimented her tea. This was a zero-mistake situation. It stole part of her life, and she'd never be able to forget that time. Now, pouring tea for the Baroness, she explained its origin again, hoping she wouldn't mind trying this particular blend. The Baroness watched the maid's every move and noticed that her manners were impeccable. Siana knew the most important part of tea was the leaves, and the ratio of boiling water to those leaves. The mistake was in how the tea was brewed and served, which made the taste bitter and the aroma weak. You couldn't screw this up, and the amount of hot water couldn't be way more than the tea, or it'd taste wrong. Also, to pour tea right, you gotta lift the kettle high, let it hit the air. That's how the aroma spreads quicker. Gotta watch out the tea doesn't spill outside the cup, then slowly hand the cup to your guest. Siana was dead certain she nailed the tea-to-water ratio and told the Baroness to speak up if anything was off. She knew she brewed it perfectly, picking the best leaves. But if the guest didn't like it, she was screwed. Frozen, waiting for a reaction, Siana even held her breath. But then Appleton announced that the tea was delicious. The former princess celebrated silently, glad she pulled it off, and then decided to take her leave. She just asked her guest to call her if she needed anything at all. Soon the tea party and that chill vibe came to an end, and after that, the guests started heading out little by little. Siana went up to the lady she'd been serving earlier and apologized for having to leave her. But she assured me everything was cool, 'cause if the Baroness had gotten pissed, things would have been way worse. And she admitted she was scared too. The Madame also said that thanks to Siana's work, they totally enjoyed the banquet, and then she thanked her. The girl was just glad this guest understood their situation and told her to be careful before she left. Then that old lady came up to Siana, and the maid figured she was about to say something to her. She started hesitantly, saying she'd been thinking a lot and admitted she'd been sure she'd be treated like crap in the imperial palace. She also said she was scared at first, but swore she got lucky with Siana, and that's when she found her courage. The girl, all happy again, repeated that the amount of boiling water shouldn't be more than the tea, or the flavor changes. Then the old lady admitted she'd had the most amazing chocolate tea and just had a blast talking. Siana remembered that for ages, maids aren't supposed to show too much emotion. Just be polite to everyone. Even though she was super happy it all worked out, she had no clue what to do next. Still, she cracked a smile and thanked the old lady for introducing her to such amazing people. The Baroness watched from a short distance as Siana said goodbye to the old woman. After the banquet itself, the maids started cleaning up, basically dedicating their entire day to serving the guests. This life was supposed to be for maids, but in reality, it was more like training for maids. Their work wraps up super late, and by the end of the day, Lip knew she was beat and needed to crash. But it wasn't all bad, since they got to enjoy the leftovers from the feast. Siana was polishing off some bitter cocoa with fancy butter, but Choo Choo passed, saying she'd lose muscle mass. The princess even felt sorry for her, thinking things must be tough, but the maid had no clue why she kept staring. Choo Choo admitted she never expected things to turn out this way when she started working, remembering a lady who offered to take her in. The guest figured she'd be useful on the farm. After checking out her massive triceps, Siana still couldn't figure out why she refused to work on the farm. And the other girl explained that's what the other maids wanted for her. Right then, the other maids came over, showering the princess with praise for handling the Baroness so well. Then they started begging the girl to teach them how to make tea that perfectly, even arguing over who'd get to learn first. But then Jean yelled, "Have you all lost your minds?" Zrina reminding them that she was the best tea maker. The redhead maid couldn't believe the others were ignoring her now, deciding they had no pride. The girls were surprised, thinking she should be feeling ashamed right now, and that's probably why she'd been silent. They also started scolding her, saying the banquet almost fell apart because of her, and thanked Siana for fixing everything. They also explained that otherwise, they all could have been punished, and Jean herself could have been fired. Now they were blasting her, saying that instead of apologizing, she's saying stuff like that, and told her to think straight. Jean immediately blew up, declaring she didn't understand how anyone could even talk to people like them. Meanwhile, Siana remembered the Baroness was a cut above the other guests. Even her posture screamed elegance. The girl noticed more than just her posture. Even her gestures during tea showed she was born aristocracy. Siana also really liked this lady, but not because she was a baroness. The girl sensed something special about her. Late that night, Sul, the guard standing at the emperor's bedroom door, noticed someone approaching. He recognized the Baroness, but explained that if she entered the room dressed like that, it would cause trouble. But Appleton, with her rigid adherence to etiquette, confessed that she still couldn't forget that maid. The guard just asked her to forget it, assuring her that no one was planning anything shady. Then, noticing her look, Sul started apologizing, clarifying that he didn't mean it like that at all. But she just smiled, thinking he was being funny, and explained that it wouldn't be funny at all. The Baroness also couldn't understand what kind of soldiers they were turning into, and hoped to see him begging for forgiveness. Then, walking into the Emperor's room, Appleton saw all sorts of critters and birds waiting there to greet her. The Baroness didn't care how it looked. She just really liked them. Then a little bird flew over and landed on her hand. Just then, Sul called her Your Majesty and explained that he already had a bath prepared. Rashid decided to change his appearance for half a day, using a magic stone that cost a fortune to do it. Once the emperor was settled in the bath, the guard asked how the meeting went and if the maids handled their duties. He admitted that it went pretty well, and that the one who was recently a princess managed to learn all the etiquette. Still, Rashid was bothered by how she held the teapot, and that she didn't look him directly in the eye. Even so, he thought it was wonderful, and everything was done exactly as it was written in the maid's etiquette manual. The emperor found this girl pretty interesting, and the guard couldn't understand why he was even thinking like that. Saul knew that he usually hated stuff like that, and now he didn't understand what was up with His Majesty. A lot of people noticed the emperor started being kinder, more approachable, and the girls even had the nerve to ask what his type was. Rashid couldn't give a straight answer, just mumbled something about liking cute girls who win you over with their smiles. His Majesty's changed so much. It's almost weird the way he looks at his people now. The guard also figured the princess had settled in, and maybe being a maid was her calling. Seoul also noticed the emperor only ever talked about her, never about getting married and having an heir. The guard started to suspect His Majesty planned to make this girl more than just a personal servant. Then, he reminded Rashid that Sienna was from the country he conquered, and if he was planning anything shady, it would end in disaster. He explained he was just testing her abilities, then confessed that he thought she looked stunning. Meanwhile, the princess found a rip in her apron and decided to fix it real quick, since she'd been doing embroidery since she was 5. While the maids were gawking at how fast she did it, Lip walked in and announced that Sienna had a visitor. The teacher said Baroness Appleton wanted to explain something to her. That's why she was here. The girl was confused. The tea party had gone well. She figured she must have screwed something up. On the way, she ran through a million scenarios in her head, but couldn't figure out where she went wrong. Then she walked into the hall, and the Baroness immediately apologized for showing up unannounced. But then she stood up, and Sienna was shocked to see it wasn't the Baroness, but that old lady. She then apologized to the maid and decided to introduce herself, explaining that she was Magdalena Appleton. The old woman also stated that Sienna had made a good impression at the tea party, then greeted her again. This all caught her totally off guard, so she decided to hand the maid the basket of apples. She also asked the girl to give her a little time, and now Sienna realized that this was the real Baroness Appleton. Now the princess was even more shocked and didn't understand who that other woman was, even though she hadn't said she was the Baroness. Sienna instantly started apologizing to the old woman for not understanding and making a mistake that offended her honor and dignity. The girl was so ashamed in that moment, and she kept begging forgiveness for her behavior. But the old woman just laughed and then explained that she had hidden her identity willingly. She explained that the tea banquet at the Imperial Palace was an opportunity she might never get again. The Baroness understood that she needed to go, but her appearance wasn't as good as it used to be, and she was afraid people wouldn't treat her with respect when they saw her like this, so it was better not to show up. Appleton understood that if she went to this celebration, everyone there would be talking about her. Everyone would judge her and ask how the Baroness could become so hideous. The old woman confessed that even in her own garden, she often heard similar taunts, and it was hard on her. Then she got another letter, offering to hide the fact that she was actually the Baroness. That's when Markadlena wondered if she should go, knowing this was her last shot at getting out. The old woman also knew that if she didn't reveal who she was, nobody would give a damn about her. But then she saw Sienna, who greeted her super politely and invited her to a table. The Baroness noticed that even without makeup, that outfit couldn't hide the girl's class. Appleton was blown away that day. Sienna's grace and politeness really impressed her, and she wanted to be just like that. After tea, the old woman started studying etiquette and even practiced in front of the mirror, figuring out how to thank the girl for a nice time. Also, Markadlena really wanted to treat the maid to some stuff from her farm, because she was seriously grateful for that day. The princess couldn't believe the actual Baroness came to thank a maid. She noticed the position of her hands, the angle of her bow, and the way her dress fell. Every move screamed nobility. Even though it was just a greeting, Markadlena Appleton was showing everyone the kind of person she was. The old lady remembered Sienna telling her not to worry about a thing and just enjoy herself, and the princess realized this was someone who lived surrounded by love, because only love can do all that. Then she bowed before the Baroness, insisting she didn't deserve such praise. The girl didn't know if she could accept it with grace, but she had no choice but to take her gift. Holding the basket of apples high, Sienna declared she'd always remember the fruit the Baroness gave her. Then she shared the apples with the other maids, and one started wondering why Snow White ate a poisoned apple. But another said she'd eat it even if it was poisoned, 'cause they're so sweet, and asked for another one. The maids, who toiled every day and ate black bread, were overjoyed that the Baroness had given them honey apples. As they ate the fruit, they now considered her a goddess, shouting how much they loved this woman now. Now Sienna herself decided to try the apples, and noticed they really were delicious. But now she couldn't shake the question of who that woman was, the one everyone mistook for the Baroness. To Sian, she looked like a prince, with the same hair and violet eyes. For a second, she thought it was the princess, checking up on the new maids. Just then, the instructor walked in, told them to stop eating, and announced that Shein was now a full-time maid. The princess was so shocked, she dropped the apple she was holding, 'cause she definitely wasn't expecting that. Jean immediately started yelling that it couldn't be true, that it was complete nonsense, and that nobody understood the decision. She demanded the instructor explain everything, who then reminded them about the tea party a few days ago. Then she clarified that it was actually a test of the students' abilities, and stated that there was no question who did the best. After that, Lip declared the topic closed and ordered Sion to be at the Ruby Castle at dawn. The instructor explained that the girl would now be serving Princess Eris and then left. Siana was blown away. All the other girls wanted to be head maids, but she showed up last and got picked first. The ex-princess just wanted to blend in, and now all the other maids are gonna hate her guts. She knew she'd have to get used to this kind of treatment, and that really bummed her out. But then she heard her friends congratulating her, saying she was finally free. Some even admitted they were jealous, but still happy for her, and Siana realized she was just being a downer for no reason. Still, she was a little bummed, but if she hadn't stepped in, that tea party would have been a total disaster. The girls also confessed that even though they wanted to be head maids, they weren't about to turn into jealous jerks. Besides, she hooked them up with those amazing apples, and then Siana thanked them for their support. She saw completely different people in them, nothing like the snakes she knew back in the kingdom, and promised to bring them treats with her first paycheck. And of course, Jean just had to chime in with her complaints, insulting the other maids while she was at it. She was saying they were totally nuts, that it was weird Siana, with her shady background, got promoted so fast. But Choo Choo stepped up, told Red that she was full of crap, and Red felt her whole body start to tremble. Still, she had enough guts left to threaten to tell her daddy everything about the others. Then she stormed out, and even though the girls thought her behavior was awful, they were happy, 'cause now they'd get more apples. Jean yelled at everyone, but the maids quickly forgot about it with the tasty food and the chatter. Siana was glad she didn't have much luggage, even though she never expected to be going anywhere from here. But starting tomorrow, she'd be the head maid of the Imperial Palace, and honestly, that's better than being a princess. She was thinking that even though she was super tired, it was a good job, and then someone knocked. It was Choo Choo, and Siana figured something was up, but she explained that nothing bad had happened. Then the muscular maid handed the former princess a hairpin, explaining that she wanted to give her a gift for her promotion. She also explained she grabbed it last minute because she was short on time, but hoped I'd dig it. Choo Choo also said maids are allowed to doll up a bit, and told me not to think she was any less than anyone else. Siana knew the junior maids barely made anything, and this girl bought her a gift, blowing her savings. Noticing her friend's pensive look, Choo Choo guessed she didn't like the present. Then she said she asked them to pick the prettiest one, but that's when Siana jumped on her with a hug. Then the ex-princess thanked her, saying it was an awesome gift and she totally loved it. Around Choo Choo, Siana always felt warmth and knew she'd miss her, but believed everything would be all right. In the morning, Lip asked one of the maids if Princess Grace had her own personal maid. The girl said that was her, and explained she asked to be transferred here because it was unbearable there. She knew it seemed crazy to outsiders, but only those who'd been there knew what was messed up about that job. The maid was all, "I'd rather scrub floors and run errands," and figured no maid on earth could ever please that princess. She remembered how awful it was in that palace, and swore there wasn't a single person in the whole empire who could handle it. A little later, Siana finished getting ready, believing her future would be way better than when she was a princess, and prepared to leave. Right before she left, that same maid popped in and said she hated to break it to her, but that job was going to be a nightmare. She explained that all the previous maids had bailed, and she dipped the second she got the chance. Siana guessed it must have been super tough doing it alone, and the maid agreed, especially keeping an eye on the princess. She also added that Princess Aris wasn't just picky. Everyone in the palace thought she was straight up the devil in disguise. There was this amazing palace with a small garden, which the emperor gave to Rosemary, a dancer he fell for at first sight. That was the Ruby Palace, and now the princess she birthed lives there, the seventh princess of the empire. Then the maid led Siana to that palace, which looked pretty gloomy from the outside. As she went inside, the maid decided to gently call the princess, but there was no response. So they continued down the hallway, and the servant knocked on the bedroom door, announcing the new maid had arrived. Siana was still hoping this princess had just been branded a mudblood or something. But as soon as they stepped inside, a gigantic spider with hairy legs appeared right in front of them. The maid who worked there before instantly screamed hysterically from fright, and then started feeling sick. Then Aris came out, and Siana thought it was unreal how she could be so energetic in this situation. The princess was holding the spider on a string and asked why the newbie hadn't reacted. Siana immediately apologized and said she'd be happy to fake whatever reaction the princess wanted to see. Then, Siana grabbed her head and screamed at the top of her lungs, like she was totally freaked out by something. After that, she asked permission to introduce herself, and when the princess gave the okay, she greeted her properly. Eris couldn't help but notice the new maid wasn't scared at all, and couldn't believe her prank hadn't worked. Tossing the spider aside, the princess told them to get lost, saying she was sick of all the maids. Siana wasn't sure what just happened, but then that maid started talking to her like nothing fazed her. She started thanking her, saying there was never a chance to leave before, since there wasn't a suitable maid. But Siana still asked what she was supposed to do here, and found out she just had to watch the princess, and the rest was up to her. The maid explained that there's no one else around anyway, except for her, and that weird little girl. The girl knew that all the work was now on her, but since she came, she had to get to it. She decided to start with cleaning, and realized that no one had tidied up in ages. Everything was getting cleaned up right before her eyes, and soon, Siana saw that it wasn't so gloomy after all. Just then, the princess came to her and declared that everything she was doing was pointless, and she didn't care about cleanliness. So Siana turned to the little girl and asked what business she had with her. But Aris was pissed that she was being treated like a real princess again, like nobody could treat her that way. Then she demanded the newbie stop acting all nice, and then declared that she'd be ditching this place the first chance she got. Meanwhile, Sol was asking the emperor why Siana had been sent to the Ruby Palace, while he thought it was better to do things methodically, not just on a whim of His Majesty. Rashid chimed in that the girl could be invited to his palace too, and the guard promised to pass the order to the maid. The emperor repeated that he could bring Siana here right now, without even giving her a chance to think about it, as he remembered seeing her at the banquet, especially how sweetly she said goodbye to the real Baroness. Rashid thought the girl was really sweet, especially when she smiled, and hoped they would see each other soon, even though the Ruby Palace was far. Siana, meanwhile, was explaining to the princess that it was a secret, and asked her to explain where she'd heard it. She told the kid she just worked there, but if she found a better gig, she'd bounce for sure. But for now, she was sticking around and would do everything she could to take care of the princess. Later, she tucked Aris into bed, and in the morning, brought her food. But the kid refused, saying the milk and veggies tasted like poison. Then the princess demanded cookies, but Siana explained that snacking instead of eating a real meal was bad for you. She also said that if she didn't eat right, she'd get sick all the time, and it was super important for a princess to be healthy. That's when Aris declared she was old enough to know better. But the maid pointed out that she was skin and bones. The girl knew that no matter how difficult Aris was, it wasn't right that nobody could be bothered to look after her. The princess also claimed the maid was lying, 'cause she was already 10, but the maid swore it was true. Then she repeated again that if she kept this up, she was going to have some serious health problems. After that, she promised the princess some sweets if she finished her whole breakfast. After breakfast, Aris didn't want to brush her teeth either, so Siana threatened to skip her sweets tomorrow. The next day, the maid opened the window and saw it was an awesome morning, the sun practically begging to come inside. But the princess was still lounging in bed, all bundled up in the blanket, and even decided to ditch breakfast. Siana finally managed to drag her up, but then Aris saw the food and demanded something decent to eat. The maid explained that this was decent food, and that she herself had also eaten a cream bun and some fried chicken. Aris just started yelling again, now because the maid had eaten everything, but she pointed out she was just following royal family rules. She also added that after mealtime was over, any food that was left over was for the servants. Now Siana felt pretty full, and she'd also found a way to get the picky kid to eat. If you make a kid hungry enough, they'll eat anything, and the maid was just scarfing down all her food. The girl remembered being locked in a room for days without food, and now she was executing her plan perfectly. The whole point of this plan was also to find out the princess's favorite food, and she ended up scarfing down the whole salad. But Eris claimed she just decided not to leave anything for the servants, remembering they get leftovers after the master eats. So the kid decided to leave the maid hungry, but Siana just praised her for doing such a good job. At the same time, the maid stroked Eris's hair, pretending to apologize for her rude behavior. She just asked her to leave again, but then noticed something in her hair and tried to pull it out. Siana, meanwhile, was happy that the food situation was resolved, and it was time to take care of cleanliness. She invited the princess to take a bath, but she started screaming that she hated water, bubbles, and the scratchy brush. Then the maid explained that if she didn't wash, cockroaches would come, because they like everything dirty. She added that these cockroaches eat skin and hair, and they even poop in it sometimes, but Eris screamed that it was a lie. The princess declared that she hadn't seen any cockroaches the whole time, and then the maid pointed out that the girl's head was itching. She told the kid to listen for the scurrying, explained it was roaches munching on stuff. The princess freaked out, thought bugs would eat her, and demanded the maid wash her up right then. At first, the loofah felt rough, but the longer she scrubbed, the better it felt. Then some foam got in her eyes, but Eris didn't feel any sting. She just liked the rosemary smell. Siana used the same trick to get her to brush her teeth, saying roaches eat teeth with food stuck on them. Soon, Eris said this maid was driving her nuts, complaining she was exhausted and had no energy left. Siana just praised the princess for doing a good job and told her she needed a good night's sleep to recharge. But then Eris started yelling that she'd been bugging her all day and didn't want her bothering her in her sleep too. The princess declared she sleeps when she wants, and the maid admitted she just wanted her to fall asleep quickly. Siana also confessed she knew an interesting story, but if the princess wasn't interested, she'd just leave. But Eris stopped her and asked her to tell her a story, and the maid agreed. Siana began. Once upon a time, there lived a diamond princess who loved precious gems more than anything. She collected them from everywhere, and then one day, she decided to cover her entire body with them, making her shine brighter than the sun. But then, she heard news that the dragon who lived in the west had the most beautiful diamond in the world. The princess desired it so much that she ventured through thorn bushes and swamps all by herself. When she arrived at the castle, the dragon saw how beautiful she was and offered her marriage in exchange for the diamond. Just then, Siana noticed Eris starting to yawn, and a few moments later, she was fast asleep. Wishing the girl sweet dreams, the maid kissed her and promised herself that she would make sure she grew up the healthiest she could be. The girl understood that this was the duty of Princess Eris's personal maid. A lot had changed since Siana arrived at this palace, but the girl was starting to act up again. The princess cut across the flower bed too, but the maid was all, "Hey, no running! I just planted those, the seeds'll get hurt." Eris asked what kind of flowers they were, and the maid just rattled off a bunch of names. She went on about how the light's perfect here, the soil's rich, and if you water 'em right, they'll bloom like crazy. Then the maid promised, once the buds open up, she'd make the princess an awesome flower crown. The whole time, the kid's just thinking, why does Siana always treat her like she's the only princess in the world? Eris was like, what's this maid's deal? She figured the maid was definitely holding something back, keeping secrets. The princess wanted to know what she was really after, but then she noticed the maid just giving her this sweet smile. Then Aris spotted a hairpin on the floor, popped it right in her hair, and when Siana saw it, her face went totally stone cold. That was the hairpin Choo-Choo gave her, and no matter how swamped she couldn't afford to lose it. So she walked over to the princess, and all apologetic, explained that the hairpin was actually hers. The girl also explained that she must have dropped it while tending the flower bed, and then asked for it back. But the little brat wasn't about to hand it over easily, and said if she wanted it back, she'd have to try and take it. Then Aris took off, confident that the maid would never catch her. Nobody ever had. But soon the girl saw the maid was almost on top of her, and couldn't figure out how she was so fast. They ended up by the fountain, and when they stopped, Siana explained that snatching stuff and running wasn't cool. Then she demanded the girl give the hairpin back, and Eris just figured, bummed out, that everything she'd said was just empty promises. The girl got all upset that Siana had promised to take care of her, and now she just chucked the hairpin in the water. She remembered one of the maids coming up to the princess and hugging her, promising that as her servant, she'd do anything Eris told her to. The girl thanked her and instantly felt all warm and fuzzy, like her mom was right there with her again. And then that maid got arrested, accused of stealing stuff from the palace and selling it, and she'd have to answer for it in court. They were dragging the maid away, and she kept begging the princess for help, but all she said was, "It's an order." The next maid packed her stuff real quick, too, and straight up told the princess she was useless, like, totally worthless. After that, the girl was all alone, and it hit her. She wasn't a princess, not without her mom. She was nobody. Even with that messed up family history, she never thought she was completely useless. But even her nanny bailed because she was too picky. Now Sienna was in front of her, supposed to be serving her too, and that's when the girl woke up. She knew it was just a bad dream, but the truth was, everyone leaves her. And when she didn't see Sienna, she figured she was gone too. Eris figured she'd packed up her stuff last night and left, so she wanted to know in advance if she'd be abandoned, so it wouldn't hurt so bad. Just then, the maid walked in, reciting some goofy poem, and noticed the princess was up super early. But seeing the weird look on the girl's face, she knew she'd had a nightmare, and told her she could go back to sleep. Sienna also explained to the kid that when you're sleepy, you don't feel hungry, so your digestion just shuts down. But Eris just couldn't believe they hadn't abandoned her, not even after everything that happened. The princess immediately ran to hug her, and then confessed that she really hadn't wanted to do what she did. The little girl also apologized and begged the maid not to hate her for throwing away the hairpin. Sienna assured her that everything was okay, but Aris still couldn't believe it, and the maid explained that little kids sometimes do things like that. At the same time, the girl admitted that she was happy the princess had sincerely apologized. The girl also confessed that she knew how unpleasant the palace was for Sienna, because there were so many chores and she was all alone. And then she suddenly promised the maid that she would help her with everything and also obey her and share her candy. Ares was ready to do anything, just so this maid wouldn't leave her, and Sienna agreed to help her grow into a worthy princess. From that day on, the princess really changed a lot and helped out, watering the flower beds or trying to clean the rooms. The girl was worried that it would be hard for the little one, but she didn't give up, and she was actually doing pretty well. Sienna kept trying to get through to her that kids have more important stuff to do than cleaning and laundry. The maid clarified to the princess that she meant studying, and the kid even got upset. But Sienna reminded her about promising to be a good girl. The servant explained to the girl that she didn't have to know hard subjects yet, but her handwriting had to be perfect. Then she went to grab a pen and paper, but when she opened the drawer, she noticed the stuff she needed wasn't there. The maid promised she'd find what she needed real quick and be right back. Then she asked a clerk to give her some pens and paper, but he refused, saying he couldn't just hand that stuff out to anyone. Sienna explained it was for the princess's lessons, but he'd had maids try to pull that for the princess card before. He also told her that if she needed anything, she had to get permission from the emperor himself. The girl knew no one would give her permission, and she almost lost it. And that's when Aris asked if she should tell Rashid's brother. It was only then that Sienna remembered the crown prince, and then she wondered if they were close. The princess said he got along great with her mom, but wasn't sure if it'd be the same with her. The maid figured if Rashid got curious, he'd bite for sure, so they had to give it a shot. Then she suggested the princess write him a letter, and before you know it, he shows up asking how they're doing. Eris was also clueless about why he was there, saying all he had to do was send confirmation. Rashid explained he got the letter, that his little sister needed help, so he decided to deliver the confirmation himself. He also pointed out that when you have guests, you greet them and offer them a cup of tea first. The maid immediately apologized, saying there wouldn't be any tea since they were out of tea leaves. But the prince told her not to sweat it, saying he brought everything, and telling her the brand, asked her to make it. Sienna never imagined she'd meet the emperor in the imperial palace like this. Plus, she noticed Rashid was staring at her, and she wondered if he even remembered her. After seeing, she also noticed how he held the teacup, and those movements seemed really familiar. The princess loved the tea, saying she'd never tasted anything like it, and complimented that it wasn't even hot. The girl explained it was because of the prince's tea leaves, but he said the princess's tea was delicious too. At that moment, the girl thought the emperor remembered her, and the little princess also felt like they knew each other. Rashid was surprised Sion hadn't mentioned him, then admitted he'd hired this girl as a maid and sent her here. Eris started asking why he did that, and her brother explained that he thought this maid was a cutie. Just then, a guard approached the emperor and reminded him about the upcoming royal visit, so they